Hi, I'm Jay Leeming, and this is the Crane Bag Podcast. On this episode, we have a story from Siberia told not by myself, but by the American storyteller Danny Deardorff. Danny Deardorff died in 2019 from complications due to polio. He was one of the last folks to suffer in a deep way from that virus before the vaccine came along. And he passed away from complications related to that virus. He was a fierce and beautiful voice in many ways. He had a rock and roll career before he had a storytelling career. And you will hear that fierceness and that beauty in this telling of this Siberian story. This is a recording from 2006, and I'm very thankful to Judith Kate Friedman, Danny's widow, for her permission to share this recording with you. It's a story about the love of freedom and the love of community and the tension between those two things. Do we want to run wild across an open field, or do we want to remain by the crackling fire in the laughter and the stories of a community? This story explores those questions. So thanks for joining me, and here we go.
So I'm going to tell you an old story. And try to let the drums go into your body. I said a marvelous thing recently. You'll like this, Robert. I said, somebody asked me, well, don't you think rationality is the highest form of consciousness? I said, no, actually. I think we've been in a rational stupor for about 10,000 years. And rationality is actually a trance state. I knew he'd like that. So you know, what initiation does and what myth does, what ritual does, is it breaks the rational trance. And it allows the true intelligence to come forward. So it's better not to write notes during the story. All right? And if something is painful, it's good to feel that pain. Okay? All right, so we'll go for a ride. Once upon a time, once upon a time, once upon a time, once behind a time, once underneath a time, once above a time, once in between a time, once before time began, there was another kind of time, and before that, there was another kind of time, and before that, there was no time at all. When the antlers of the reindeer still reached to the highest heaven, and the tail of the badger still reached to the lowest underworld. And everything that happened for the first time, even when it happened again. In a time like that, there was a house in the forest, in the north, and in the house was a wife and a husband. It was not a village. They lived alone. And the life they had there was not bad. the husband did a good job, and all the things they needed were there. So you could say it was a good life. But the wife wouldn't agree. Because of two things. Two irritating and insufferable things. And the first was this: that the husband had only one eye. And he was ugly. He was, in fact, an ugly, one-eyed husband. And this bothered her. But that was not the worst thing. The worst thing, the second aggravating, irritating, and insufferable thing about this man was that he got up in the morning before she awoke and he disappeared. And he didn't come back till after dark. And he would bring food and he would bring things that were needed. But he would not reveal to her what he did or where he went. He was a secretive, ugly, one-eyed husband. The ugliness bothered her, but the secretiveness nagged at her. Day by day it grew. Her curiosity, until finally she couldn't stand it no longer, and she decided that she would lay awake all night, and she would wait to hear him rise and depart, and she would follow him and find out once and for all where he went and what he did. This was strictly forbidden, you understand? But she did it. She went to bed with all her clothes on, and she pulled the covers up tight to her chin, and she waited. And when the husband, the secretive, ugly, one-eyed husband, got up out of bed and stole quietly out of the house, soon thereafter she followed. And she followed him deeper into the forest. And she saw that he came out somewhere in the center of that deep, dark forest, into a glade of birch trees, a ring of beautiful birches, and there in the light he stood in the center of that little meadow, and he transformed into an even uglier husband than she could possibly have imagined. Now he had no eyes at all, and his features seemed to ooze and change shape in the sunlight. It was disgusting. She did not need to stay and study this at all. She had all the information she needed. She went back to the hut, she packed a bag, and she left. And she was never going back there again. She was done with it. She found a path, and she followed the path, and the path led to a road. And when she came to the road, she took the road, and she followed the road. And she went that way for a long time, or a short time, or an even longer time. But suddenly she came around a bend in the road, and there, towering before her, motionless, was a giant. A giant too big to go around, towering above her and looking down with a look that stopped her dead in her tracks. And without a word, the giant reached down, grabbed a handful of her hair, slung her over his shoulder, and began to run in his giant strides, knocking trees over as he went. He tore a swath through the forest, running away from the road, running deep through the forest and higher, 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 into higher ground and up into the mountains and into the frozen and snowy places up there, the barren and frozen places. And he took her to this strange place up there at the top of the mountain. And on the top of the mountain was a great yurt. And he threw her inside and he locked the door. And it was dark and it was cold and she had nothing to eat. And she lay there in blindness, weeping, hungry, and freezing. This is not an improvement. This is not what I had in mind at all. And she began to wail and weep and lament what had befallen her. No one knows how long she wept there in the dark and cold. But eventually, a voice spoke to her. A voice that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once. A strange, yet oddly familiar voice. Saying, "Don't cry now. Look up. In the rafters, there are baskets with the skins of birds. Take one down and try it on." And so she looked up, and lo and behold, she could dimly make out that there was a basket above her head. And she took it down, and she opened it, and inside she found the skin of a raven. And she thought, this will do nicely. And she began to slip it on. But it didn't fit. It was too small. It was improperly made. She threw it back in the basket and collapsed on the floor, weeping and moaning and crying and lamenting again. Until the voice returned. "Don't cry now. Look up again. In the rafters, there are baskets with the skins of animals. Take one down and try it on." And so she took it down. And this time she found the skin of a fox. And she slipped it on, and it fit perfectly. And suddenly she was warm. And suddenly she could see in the dark. And suddenly she could smell the air. And she smelled and sniffed her way around until she found a little hole low to the ground under the wall where fresh air was seeping in. And she dug her way out and she ran. And she ran down that mountainside. She ran. She ran like the wind. And she said to herself, I'm going home. I'm going home now. I'm going home. After all my misadventures, I'm going home. It was a long journey. She became thirsty. She stopped at a still pond to drink. And looking into the pond, she saw the brush of a fox's tail rising above her ears. And looking more closely at her face, she saw the pointed ears of a fox. And she saw that in fact she had become a fox. But she was still going home. So she drank and she continued to run. Eventually she came to the ocean, and walking along the shore, she knew that soon she would come to the village of her birth. And as she walked along the shore, she saw far out on the water a kayak with a man paddling swiftly to shore. The hunter in the kayak had seen the fine vixen on the shore and was paddling in. He came to the shore and he beached his craft. He came out. In one hand he held a nice piece of sweet seal meat, and in the other he held a net which he swung slowly around his shoulders, ready to cast it. And he approached the vixen, holding out the sweet seal meat. He came close. She came close. He threw the net. She leapt away. And she saw that the man, this hunter, was her father. And the father and the daughter did this dance, coming close and moving apart, and him failing to catch her again and again. Finally, he gave up. And in giving up, he tossed the sweet seal meat to the vixen, which she caught in her mouth. And the man turned away and went home. Now she knew that she would be hunted again and again if she was seen by the other men in the village. And so she waited for nightfall She waited till the deepest dark of night, when all the people were asleep. And it was her intention to slip into the village and find her way into her father's house. And be there for a moment or longer, but if only a moment, fine. It was her intention to return to her home. You understand? She wanted to go home. And so she went into the village in the darkness, without a sound, and she came to the door of her father's yurt. And she went to push the door flap to the side and dart in to the old home. But as she did so, the whole yurt turned, and her nose hit the doorpost. She backed up. She got a good run this time. She aimed for the center of the door. But just as she would have gone through, the yurt turned again, and the doorpost was there before her nose, and she struck it. And now this dance went on, the dance between the vixen and the doorpost, until her nose was bleeding, and the ground before the door of the father's house was covered with blood. And the dawn star rose, and she knew soon the hunters would be rising, and she knew that she would not be able to enter her father's home again. And so she ran. She ran out into the meadows, into the wild night. Above the village, below the mountains, she runs and leaps and saunters and plays beneath the stars through the whole divine night. And as far as anyone knows, she's running and playing there still.
This story raises some questions. Some of those questions might be, do we keep secrets when we're in relationship? Is that a proper thing to do? What do you keep secret and what do you not? What do you share with your partner, the other person there? Is it hiding? Is it a keeping? Is it a thieving of energy from the relationship to do that? Or is it the nurturing of a crucial energy for yourself? Because we are ourselves in relationship, and we are also this larger thing, this larger beast, this animal of a marriage, a relationship, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever it is, organization, even a job, a place. Do we tell those secrets or do we keep them for ourselves? I encourage you to let this story drop into your bones. And may there be some silence in your life, in the world, for you to feel this story as it is meant to be felt. It's a story from Siberia, I should say, a place I would imagine of cold and silence and empty spaces. So let this story go into you. But perhaps I can say something, how it strikes me, and maybe that will teach me something and maybe help inspire others to go into this story. I don't know. I'm no expert. I'm just feeling it like you are. For me, the moment in the beginning, they've got this marriage and it's not quite ideal, should we say. There is distance between them. And she wants to follow. He's a secretive husband and she wants to follow. For me, that bugs me. Oh, boy. I remember being a kid. I go back to being 12 years old or whatever, 14, and going off into the woods behind my house, and my mother wanting to know what I did out there. Not in a strenuous way, not in a way like she was going to follow me, but she would ask, what do you do over there? What do you do over there? And of course, none of your business is the answer, the soul says. I was in a time when I needed some solitude to grow, like a chrysalis shelters a caterpillar to become a butterfly, like the egg. We all need those times. The cave, the man cave, people say, but there's also the boudoir, the sulking room. There's the woman cave. I don't think it's one gender or the other. I think we all need that time. In any case, hearing this story, I remember that moment for me of going off into the woods and being asked, what do I do over there? And that bugs me in the same way in this story. I remember that moment. I think at that moment, she wants to follow him, what's going on, and she follows. So that moment strikes me. And then her in the tent with the animal skins. And the raven doesn't fit, but the fox does. Something beautiful about that. Why is it the raven did not fit? But the fox, she's all about the fox. Beautiful thing. And to feel that harmony between yourself and the skin you put on. We could ask ourselves, this story could ask us, what animal skin did you put on to get out of the tent, to escape? What animal skin did you put on to escape from that situation, that job, that state, that apartment, that lousy relationship, that bad car, that bad deal you made? How did you get out of it? And what animal skin did you have to put on? That's a question we could ask ourselves. I encourage you, me, us to ask it. And then she runs off. And it's beautiful, but for me it's sad as well. And at the end, the doorpost, she doesn't get into the house itself, the yurt rejects her. She's a fox coming back, and she cannot come back. And that's kind of horrible and scary for me. It's the flip side, I suppose, of the keeping secrets at the beginning. You want to keep something for yourself. Let me speak for me. I want to keep something for myself, some energy for myself. But when it's the opposite, that when it goes too far, then you're completely cut off, and the community does not want you, and you are left out in the cold, as she literally is in this story. That's an ouch for me, to be shut out. And I have been shut out, haven't we all? Haven't we all? You go to the door and they say, no, you have the wrong shoes on. You are the wrong color. You are the wrong type of person. You don't get to come in. And they close the door and you go away. That's a moment that this story talks about, I think, and I can feel it. Who among us has not been rejected? And perhaps we weave beautiful cloth out of the fabric of that rejection. Perhaps we don't. Perhaps it just is a drag. Perhaps it is just a horrible thing, a wound, a scar, perhaps. Danny talks about this story, and one thing he says is that when he tells this story he's told it to mixed audiences, he's told it to only women, and he's told it to only men. He says in general, women hearing this story love it and get happier and happier as they hear this story. women hear the story and get happier and happier. That's been his experience in telling it. And when he tells it to men, they get sadder and sadder. Isn't that amazing? So the same story, and different genders in general hear it differently. That was his experience. That's what he said on the recording of the story. So that's very interesting. Does it divide along gender? Well, it might or it might not. And who do we identify with? We all have a feminine side and a masculine side. It is a spectrum. We don't want to get too caught up, especially these days, in those things. But nevertheless, how does this story make you feel? Is it a freedom to be shut out of that tent and that community, to run wild across the snow? Is it a wild and beautiful thing? Or is it a sad and a painful thing? Do you like your exile or not? Is it really exile, or are you in simply another kingdom that you are happy to be in? Though you will never be human again. That's the price. Is that the price? Well, I'm a fella, and I hear this story more as sad than anything else. But, it's a beautiful thing, too. I appreciate the beauty of the fox. But it's a shadowy story for me. And let me know how it feels for you. I hope you feel something from this story. Please, yes, let us feel something from this story. I guess the thing is, the community that shut you out, is it one you wanted to be in or you did not? In this story, she leaves relationship and she tries to get back into community, and she is refused. And is that joyous or is it sad? So is that community something you want to be in or not? We could make a test. There could be a test. You've just been rejected from Harvard Law School. How does that feel? You've just been rejected from the Ornithological Union of the Americas. You've just been accepted into the applesauce team of Ultimate Frisbee. You've just been accepted into the Union of Concerned Scientists. Where do you want to be? Where do you want to stand? Do you want to be the fox running across the frozen ice? Do you want to be there in that bed with that ugly, secretive husband? Do you want to be in the yurt, in the village? Where do you want to be? Where do you want to stand? These are some of the questions this story brings up. Thank you for listening. You can find more stories at my website, which is jayleeming.com, JAYLEEMING.com. If you are able to support this podcast, please do so. Patreon is a great way to do that, and that helps to make this podcast and these stories to happen, to get the stories out into the world where they can run and jump and live and breathe. They are not meant to be in the books. They sleep in the books, but they live in our voices and in our lives. May we learn from these stories. Once again, thanks to Judith Kate Friedman for permission to share this recording with you. And thank you for listening to this story, and take care.